research. And now we have a different presentation. I'm going to bring in both Alex and Josh now. Alex, of course, just disappeared as he did that. I know you. Come on. Come on. And here's Josh Herzenberg as well.
Woo!
How you doing, Josh?
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get going, everybody, remember we're doing this for Feeding America. So please go to the link below, go.rallyup.com/PitchCon. We're aiming to hit about 6,000 before the end of the day. We're about 4,500 and change right now. Hopefully we can raise some money in the next couple of things. We have 3 to go. We're going from 8 to 11. So after this, we have Paul Sporer doing a presentation at 9. And then at 10, we have Miles covering the blind co-manager draft that we've done. It's amazing. I cannot wait for that. But until then, I mean, we've got this fantastic presentation about what it's like being an R&D director. Can't wait. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and do it. Thanks so much for being a part of this.
Bye, Nick. Ugh, who was that guy, huh? All right. Hey, Josh. How you doing?
Hello, Alex. I'm great.
Good. So for those who are listening at home and tuning in, first of all, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm very excited to be hosting this talk today, which is with Josh Herzenberg, who, as Nick just mentioned, is the Director of Research and Development for the Lotte Giants. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the accolades because I'm sure Josh is going to get to them as we begin to talk. I am fortunate enough to be, I think we could call each other friends at this point, right, Josh? Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of texts from you.
Is that how it is? Is that how it is? So I want to get right to it, though. So before we get into the nitty gritty of what kind of like the day-to-day is like in research and development and where we think that field is going, which is something that we're going to obviously spend a lot of time discussing, I want you to just start from the beginning and tell us how you made your way into the baseball world.
Yeah, grew up in New York, was born and raised in New York, pitched in college, was a Division III left-handed pitcher. Always knew I kind of wanted to pursue a career in baseball. Wasn't really sure what that would look like, and ended up latching on as an intern, video intern with the Nationals right out of school. Kind of networked with some people, was really fortunate to have some scouting opportunities. Spent a year with the D-backs, kind of like learning the ropes, lived in Tampa, and then was brought on by the Dodgers. Spent several years as a scout with the Dodgers, covering North Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and also did a few years as a minor league coach with them. And, the opportunity to kind of see how different departments work and get an understanding of how to collaborate across, those departments, and sort of see an organization like the Dodgers sort of build from the ground up over the years that I was there was really instrumental. And then about a year, 15 months ago, came over to Korea, and here we are with Lotte.
Now, I think you're being a little bit modest, as I've seen your name mentioned very frequently with a particular Dodgers pitcher who I believe you were instrumental in bringing to that organization. Am I correct there?
I drafted a few guys. I guess the one that the big name, I guess, right now would be Dustin May, who I signed out of high school. The concept of signing scouts kind of weird. Just like one person getting public credit for something. I mean, there were a lot of people involved in that process, but I was the scout that put his name next to Dustin on the contract originally. Yeah.
That's pretty cool to see. There's going to be a lot of fantasy players who are absolutely either going to love you or hate you this year as a result of that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you're welcome and sorry. So,
all right. So I want to talk about a little bit that transition from the Dodgers to Lotte. I know there's a little time in between, but still, that's a pretty big jump to go from the MLB to the KBO. You're working your way up this kind of organizational ladder, right? I'd love to hear a little bit about that transition, both from a cultural perspective and how you dealt with that, and then also from a pure baseball perspective, as this is something we've talked a lot about as we've become more familiar with the KBO over a pitcher list, which is it's baseball, of course, but it's a different brand of baseball. And I don't mean that in a way of AA, AAA. I actually don't care about that at all. It's just played in a very unique, fun way, a way that many people I think would love MLB to be played, which is fast-paced and contact-oriented. But can you tell us a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, so culturally it has been different. I would say at the end of the day, I mean, we're trying to win baseball games. And so integrating data, which is sort of my lane, if you will, has been different in a sense of the familiarity with the data from the players and the coaches' perspective. But at the end of the day, everybody's been pretty good with understanding that, implementing these sort of processes are have the goal of winning baseball games. So the way I would describe it, and I don't mean this like derogatory at all to anybody, but working for a place like the Dodgers was almost like working for like a Goldman Sachs, where your process works, it works. It's a high functioning machine. There's a ton of resources, and everybody was working really efficiently and working hard because the process works. We kind of knew that. With Lotte, it was kind of like working for a startup that's going for their first fundraising round. Like, we didn't really know, like, hey, we're going to try this and we're going to document and we're going to build, we're going to turn our processes into systems, and we're going to turn the operation into something that's self-sufficient, but it's going to take a little time because there's no sort of infrastructure in place yet. I don't know if the goal is necessarily to change the style of play. Because like you said, there are really positive elements to how the KBO is played and how the game works over here in terms of the differences from MLB. But I do think there are ways that we can perhaps make specifically our gameplay more efficient in terms of strategy, whether it's like pitch sequencing or lineup optimization or how we draft and develop prospects. That's something that we've been working on pretty heavily. So yeah, just like little tweaks here and there in multiple different departments, I think make a big difference when you kind of add them all up. And that's kind of been the strategic outlook since I came over here, just in terms of like the cultural differences and everything.
So did you find then that was there something that you needed to kind of tweak in your brain in terms of research and development of, so there's obviously a different style of play, right? And, in Major League Baseball, one of the big things is elevated four-seamers. And, that could be a part of the game of the KBO, but maybe implemented a little bit differently. Was there a switch that you had to make? Was there a time where you had to sit down and study and say, okay, like you said, we need to win baseball games? Doing that in the KBO is different. How long did it take you to find what winning baseball games looked like in the KBO, and how difficult a transition was that to going from trying to win games in the MLB to winning games in the KBO?
I think you hit on one of them. That's actually something we're still working on. Just the vertical, like the bat angle is totally different here. I think because hitters have such a contact oriented approach, the entry angle of bats is much more level here, to where in the States, obviously there's been an evolution of a high fastballs, partly because there's been an evolution of like more of an uppercut swing. I don't like using that phrase because, again, it has a negative connotation. But here that's less dramatic. So, I mean, elevated fastballs still work, but I think what we found in our research and in conversations with pitchers is the strategic process behind actually executing that fastball is a little more hyper specific here, because guys are going to be able to hit it a lot more often than they are in the States. And maybe it's because of the velocity. Obviously here, the average velocity in the league is lower than an MLB. So perhaps it's because of that. But we've actually found in our research that the entry angle of the bat is something that's a pretty dramatic difference. And then like shifting changes, I think there's a lot more, because it's such a contact oriented approach. It's actually, I found a little more difficult to implement really efficient defensive shifts over here. Just because guys do generally spray the ball better, hit the ball more to all fields in the KBO better than MLB, which is something that I was told before I came over here, and I really didn't believe it, to be honest with you. And then I started getting the data, and I started putting together spray charts and everything, and it really is a difference. So we just try to position guys as effectively as possible, but it's a little bit harder to do because we're expecting guys to have a wider range of outcomes, just because like the natural tendency is to actually be able to spray the ball at a more regular pace. That's something that's pretty unique from what I've seen.
So, I mean, we kind of joked about this before. Obviously, I can't say, hey, what is a day in the life like? You know what I mean? Because that changes a bunch, right? But so I'm going to tweak it a little bit. Now, rather than that, I'm going to ask you, what do you frequently spend most of your time doing?
Outside of reading your texts, which is
outside of reading my text. If people only knew, I have the receipts, Josh. Okay, I have the receipts.
Yeah. We can post them. No, I would say, it varies. The way I look at it is, we try to implement this sort of, horizontal hierarchy. And what I mean by that is not necessarily that everybody has the same say in every single process. We obviously have our defined roles. But once you have your defined role, our systems engineer is the systems engineer expert, and our biomechanist is the biomechanics expert, excuse me. Once we have those defined roles, then your value is equal to everybody else. So as the director of the department, I don't see myself as being better or worse or more important or less important than anybody. I see myself fitting a role, and that role is important just as everybody else's role is. So my responsibilities are a little bit more high level and strategic. Recently we've been doing a lot of budget meetings, which are probably the least favorite part of the job for me, partially because of COVID and just like that's the time of the year. But the focus is a lot on implementation of timelines and implementation of structure in terms of what we're trying to build. So as we continue to build out our database, for example, our internal database, or our projection systems, we have to kind of keep everything on the straight and narrow. So I kind of describe it as a metaphor of, we're driving in traffic in LA on a 5-lane road, and I'm the one that's building the HOV lane. And then hopefully we're helping our the employees in R&D kind of just drive in a straight line and be able to do their jobs. I also kind of help serve as a liaison between the coaching staff and the R&D department. So, we have a lot of information that we need to provide. And a lot of it is trying to figure out what's relevant. What do the coaches need? What do the players want? What does the front office need in order to make trade decisions or releasing a player or signing a player? Promoting a player, so those types of conversations, I spend a good chunk of my day in meetings with the GM or the AGM or the manager or the pitching coach and whatever, just trying to figure out exactly, hey, what do we need? What exactly is the information you're looking for to do your job so that I can come back to our team in R&D and we can execute on the task accordingly to just make this whole thing really efficient. So, I mean, it's tough to say exactly what I do every day, but it's a lot of communicating. I spend like 80% of my day just having conversations with people and trying to figure out exactly what's needed, so that we can execute on our tasks accordingly on the technical side of things.
Now, I mean, being practical here for a second too, that's, there's a difference between doing that where English is the first language and then doing that in a nation where obviously Korean is the first language there, of course. How has that been? I mean, like trying to institute levels of communication, trying to build that HOV lane already seems difficult for many front offices in the United States. How has that been for you building that lane with the KBL?
Yeah, I mean, just like at the very surface level, we do have interpreters. So in terms of just being able to literally communicate across the languages, that's really not too much of an issue. But obviously, we are talking about pretty technical concepts, and we are talking about things that are pretty specific and important. That an interpreter, they're great at their jobs, but a lot of the interpreters we have aren't familiar with like what X WOBA is, for example. And so what I've actually found is the challenge has been really good for me in terms of my personal progression in my career, just because it requires me to be a lot more efficient with the way I communicate. You and I can just kind of ramble and we can just kind of talk because you understand English, I understand English, we kind of understand the same concepts. That's not the case here. And so it really requires me to kind of do the same thing in my thought process of, okay, what exactly are we trying to get done? And how can I communicate this very efficiently so that the message is getting across to the person that I'm speaking with? And vice versa, so it requires a combination of efficient communicating, efficient talking, and efficient listening. Both ways in the conversation, and it takes some time. Everybody has a different personality. Culturally, Korea is very different than the United States in terms of how to communicate with people, and the hierarchy of how things work at the workplace. So it's definitely been different, and it's been an adjustment. I'm going into my second year here. I'd like to think I have a good beat on how it works now, but things change. But yeah, I mean, these things take time and you got to learn. It's definitely like another barrier, but I wouldn't say it's totally something that has been such a strain that's been unable to overcome. Plus the GM here and the assistant GM here speak English fluently. So that's very helpful when I'm in the office and I'm, having conversations with them. It's just in English, which is very helpful because the majority of the communication I have is probably with our GM, and he's fluent in English.
So this is a little tangential, but you kind of brought it up that I thought was interesting. What, you're going into your second year, and really, while Lotte just missed out in the playoffs last year, had a remarkable year compared to the year that they had the year before you arrived. They made some great strides. Thanks to you and Sungmin Kim, I have turned into a Lotte Giants fan. Is there something that Josh year 2 wishes he could have told Josh year 1 as he was coming into the KBL?
Good question. Just like I'm probably going to keep using this word, just like efficiency. I think now that we have a better understanding of what we're doing, we know what we're not supposed to do. And I think last year was a trial and error process for everyone, but also for me personally. I originally came on in the organization as pitching coordinator and quality control coach, and was kind of a dual role. And because there was a lot of uncertainty about how we're going to build these structures, I was kind of devoting my time probably in an inefficient way. And so I think now that we have this communication line set up, we have the processes in place to execute on the strategies, just be efficient, in terms of how to implement my ideas personally in the culture that exists here. I probably could have or should have done more research about the workplace culture before I came over here. Not that I made any negative assumptions or ignorant assumptions coming over, but Korea is a very different place culturally than the United States. And so now that I have an understanding of how to communicate with people, who to communicate with, and like what that communication is going to look like, that's definitely something that I probably could have prepared better for coming over. And something now I'm actually excited to move forward and improve on, because it's something that I think will make the entire organization better as we continue to move things forward.
So I want to get back to the earlier question, which is about the day-to-day, right? And like you said, that's a kind of a nebulous question, nebulous being the word of the day for you and I. But I do know from experience that a lot of your job, week in and week out, and you can, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, is an ideation process, right? Is people coming up with fantastic new ideas, right? Whether that be in biomechanics, whether that be in, something about the actual game in and of itself with sequencing. How frequently do you feel you're involved with the ideation process, or how frequently is it where someone on your team comes up to you and says, hey, I think, fastball changeup sequencing really matters when it comes to left-handed hitters behind in the count. What's that relationship like?
It's pretty symbiotic. I would say it's pretty tough to say like a percentage. I mean, I come up with ideas. A lot of it's just reading online, to be honest with you. I read Fangraphs, I read Baseball Prospectus, I read like Tom Tango stuff all the time on his blog. So
and Pitcher List, and you read Pitcher List and Pitcher List.
What's Pitcher List?
Okay, fair enough. Go on. Yep.
Yeah. I check out, I'm on Twitter every day reading a lot of different things. I don't think Alex Fast has written anything worthy of any. We don't have like CSW in our system or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it's just honestly just reading and sharing, communicating information. There is a language barrier also. That's something that's interesting that I didn't touch on. A lot of the English language writing that's out there doesn't fully get communicated into the Korean baseball culture. And so part of my job is literally just reading information online and being like, hey guys, this is an idea we should think about. But my coworkers in R&D are great, and they're constantly coming up with new ideas and constantly figuring out ways to tweak things. So I would say the overall ideology of the department and the organization as a whole is to just move things from a process to a structure. I think process is very idea oriented, where processes are great. And we need processes, and we need like an idea blueprint behind what we're trying to do. But if we're not building the structure behind everything, then it's kind of just an idea and it's just talking into air. We actually need an infrastructure behind what we're doing. So my favorite question to ask, and I'd like to think that a lot of people are asking the question, is just why. The more we can ask why, the more specific we can get, and the more we get the reasoning behind an idea, the more we get the reasoning behind the process. And so we can take this high level concept, like the example you gave of, a fastball changeup sequencing. Okay, why do you think that's good? Here's the data. Okay, why do you think the data says that? Okay, why isn't something else a better idea? And we just keep diving into the why, and we get to this really finite answer, and it gives us a lot of variables to consider. And then once we actually come up with the proper answer, whether it's a definitive answer, whether it's the original answer we thought it was going to be or not, it is a pretty strong answer because we've done a lot of diligence on the back end, and we can present that information in a very applicable way. And that's the goal, and then we implement it in our infrastructure, and then it's just kind of self-sufficient from there.
So that's actually the next part of the question that I want to hear a little bit more about: ideation to implementation, and how far down the road do you personally take implementation? I mean, I would like to believe that the obvious answer is, okay, give it to coaches. It's their job to make sure it gets implemented. But does it stop there? I mean, it has to go a little bit further, where you probably want to make sure the players are, taking high-end concepts and getting it in a digestible way, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's balance. The coaches are experts. They're the ones that are in the clubhouse. I was very fortunate to come from a coaching background. I spent 2 years as a minor league coach of the Dodgers. I was here as a coach last year on our first team, which is like the big league team here. So I've spent years in the clubhouse and the dugout. And so I don't think when I was prior to me coaching, I had no idea just how much time coaches and players spend together in the clubhouse. It's unbelievable how much time you spend with the guys. So in a way, it's like you are the expert because you know the guys inside and out. You know everything about them. You know how to communicate with them. That is your job. And so, as an analyst, as someone that's in the office, we do need to respect the coach's expertise, and we do need to trust that they are going to be able to execute on that. So it's a matter of figuring out how to best communicate those ideas. I mean, sometimes, you know, if just using your example, like if it's something that I have that I personally bring to a coach, and the coach is cool and we're on the same page and they go to the player and the player fully understands it, oftentimes it's done. That's not that usual, to be honest. I think it's a continuous process, where you're constantly trying to tweak things, you're constantly trying to revise things. And the idea of the communication channel being, you know, office to coach to player to coach to office is not necessarily true all the time. I mean, it's probably the most preferred method. But sometimes I talk directly to the players. Sometimes the coaches are the ones doing the analysis. I'm not a huge fan of like staying in your lane. I think, you know, if you have a good idea, let's try it. I don't really care what your title is. You know, I know you and Dan Strelly have a relationship, and Dan and I were literally texting last night and again this morning. It's morning here, by the way. Just about, you see the sunlight, just about ideas, you know, and if Dan comes up with something that he might find interesting, I'm going to bring it to R&D, or if he finds it, he'll go to the pitching coach and the pitching coach will come to me or the GM. It's not really like this, you know, R&D does this and the coaching staff does that. It's more, we're just trying to do the best thing, you know, and whoever's idea it is, it doesn't really matter who gets credit for it, because at the end of the day, if we win on the field, we're all happy. We're all going to get a ring out of it. So I don't really care who gets the credit for it, as long as I get the ring, you know?
Yeah, or maybe even a giant sword, like didn't the Dinos get that last year, right?
Yeah, that looked interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen them, but when we go there, I'll travel and I'll try to get a picture of it.
I would like to see what that looks like.
I'll take a selfie with it.
Okay, great. One of the things from MVP Machine, the Travis Sawchik, Ben Lindbergh book, that really stuck out to me, that I always bring up as a conduit, right? A person who can take high level concepts and relate it to a player, right? And that's not to say that players can't understand high level concepts. There are definitely players who can understand high level concepts, but generally there needs to be someone who can take something from a stat sheet and bring it to a player in a presentable way. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about that, because really what you're kind of hinting at is you are that conduit. You know what I mean? How difficult is it for you to shift those gears? I mean, are you constantly dabbling in analogies to make sure that people understand, you know, the kind of high level things that you're dealing with?
So I guess to answer the first, it's kind of a two-part answer. That role, I think, is not just exclusive to one person. I think we're at the point now in the industry that's the market inefficiency. Like, that's the competitive advantage, where we all have the information, like the advanced concepts and the data and the raw information is kind of, everybody has it. It's a matter of who can best implement it and who can best communicate it. So it's not really my job. It's kind of everybody's job. In our department specifically, I'd like people to take control over their expertise. So if our data analysts come up with a concept, I much prefer them to go into the clubhouse and share it with the relevant users. We have a biomechanist on staff who has a PhD who's tremendous at what she does. And so when we have a biomechanics lab, when I'm in the lab, she's the boss. You know, she runs the show. And so I try to communicate that with the players and the coaches that are there as well. You know, Harry's running the show up here. As it relates to the conduit portion of my job, as you mentioned, I don't know if I necessarily come up with like analogies all day. I think the important part is to help players and coaches understand that, you know, there's a baseline level of knowledge that's not really difficult to understand, whether it's discussing how to use Rapsodo, or, you know, the importance of like a spin efficiency metric from TrackMan, or even, you know, we talked about XWOBA earlier. Just understanding the baselines of, like, take XWOBA. I'll use that for example, like what the metric WOBA is trying to accomplish and what we are exactly trying to measure. They don't need to know the formula. They just need to know exactly what the goal is. And then from there, it's much less intimidating. And so I can go to somebody and I can say, hey, your XWOBA is 340. and they know that 320-ish is about average, they'll at least have an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. And from there, the scariness of the advanced metric kind of goes away. So it's less about coming up with analogies and more about helping people understand the baseline knowledge of what the metric is without taking away from their competitiveness and the work that they need to do to prepare for the game. Because another thing is, athletes have a lot on their minds, and it's a very fast-paced game. So you're trying to be efficient because you're not trying to cloud the mind, and you're not trying to make them think about things that aren't relevant on the field. And so it's definitely a balance. I would say we all share conduit responsibilities in R&D. And maybe I'm the one that brings like the more big picture ideas to the table. But I certainly wouldn't call myself the sole conduit. I don't think that would honestly be possible. I just think there's so much information we're sharing that it kind of needs to, the responsibilities kind of need to be shared across the department.
I don't understand that when you frequently text me, I am the sole conduit. So that kind of, there's a little bit of a, you know what I mean?
Well, thank you for helping me. Thank you for helping me spell the word soul.
So you talked about the Biomechanics Lab. I've seen, a YouTube video that came out about it. I imagine 2-3 years ago, maybe even last year, biomechanics isn't something that you were heavily proficient in. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, definitely.
What has that experience been like, learning about biomechanics specifically? How well do you feel you learn new subjects? And 3, what are you learning about right now?
So the first question was, what's changed? I realized I was a terrible evaluator of pitchers when I was a scout. It's just the body, it's impossible. There's no such thing as perfect mechanics. If there is, we haven't figured it out yet. I should say that. So I'm in constant communication with a lot of different people in my network, and there's so many tremendously smart people out there that are studying this, including our biomechanist, Dr. Harry Kim. It's fascinating watching the human body move. And so our goal in a very, very simple way is just to figure out how to maximize the efficiency of a player's movement while minimizing their injury risk. And that's kind of like our mission statement, if you will, using the lab. So, and we're working on pitchers, we're working on hitters, we're working on catchers, we're doing anything we can in there. We have force plates to manipulate some things. So, so yeah, I would say the first answer is just like, it's totally changed my perception of just how to evaluate pitcher mechanics and what exactly is optimal. How well do I learn new information? I'm a little stubborn as a learner. I think like if I like it, I'm a sponge, and if I don't like it, I just reject it. And I probably need to be conscious of that as I'm learning things. Biomechanics fascinates me, probably selfishly because I was a pitcher and I had Tommy John surgery when I was in college. And so I think just like inherently, it's just a fascinating concept to me to try to work on injury risk. And it's so new, it's kind of exciting. So it's a conscious effort sometimes for me to try to understand new concepts, just because if my initial reaction is to reject it as something that I'm not interested in, I kind of just reject it. And that's probably not a great trait, but it's something I probably need to work on. And then the third thing is, what are we learning right now? I mean, there's some stuff that we can't really discuss publicly at this point. Maybe next year at PitchCon, I can hop on.
I was waiting for how long we got the confidential stuff, but 30 minutes.
I mean, I don't know. It might not be. Hopefully, it's not confidential. I'll put it this way. Hopefully, it's not confidential in about a month.
Okay.
I'll put it that way. But yeah, I mean, honestly, just like figuring out how to help people move and how to help them improve. The specific thing that is on the docket for this week is related to spin for pitchers. I'll put it that way. I can't really go further than that.
That's fine.
Yeah, but just trying to help people move, biomechanically, just trying to figure out how we can best put the human body in the best position to move the best constantly throughout the game. And that goes to pitchers and hitters and catchers and position players, and anything we can put motion capture markers on and throw on force plates, we're going to test. And so Harry, like I said, Dr. Harry Kim's been doing an incredible job kind of running that process. There was zero infrastructure for that when I got here. The lab was finished early last spring. It was delayed a little bit because of COVID. I think we finished it in like mid-April. And so we've been ramping up. We've tested all our minor league pitchers several times. We've tested our big league guys. Like, we're really getting rolling now. And I'm really, really excited for our progress biomechanically. I think we're like really ahead of the pack there. And it's been super cool to watch her work.
We have a really unique opportunity to talk to you about something which I'm actually really excited about, because we've talked about kind of high level concepts, we've talked about ideation, we've talked about implementation, but we've yet to really get into a specific example of that. And we're fortunate enough to have a specific example of that, because I heard a rumor that one of your pitchers, who might have been one of the more strikeout dominant pitchers in the KBO last year, could be throwing a new cutter. And that
Yeah.
you may have helped bring that new pitch along, or you might help to suggest that. So A, I'm interested in you confirming whether or not that's true. And B, I'm really interested in hearing about that journey, how that came about and how that's going.
Is that the guy who put K King on his glove because he led the world in strikeouts last year?
Yes, I might have been the reason why he did put the I led the world in strikeouts last year. Yeah, me or someone else, but it might have been me. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing that.
You're welcome.
I don't hear about it every day or anything. Yeah, so for those who don't know, we're talking about Dan Straley. Dan's incredible in that, look, the guy's 32. He's had a pretty long professional career. He's made a good amount of money. And yet, like I said, we text every day. He's just constantly trying to learn and get better. So the credit goes to him for just, seeking out information and constantly striving to improve. Last year, his spin rates went up when he got to the KBO, I think for a few reasons. And he also added a curveball to his arsenal, which was a kind of a stabilizer to lefties. It was his fourth pitch. He goes fastball, slider, changeup, curveball, but it was effective as a stabilizer to lefties. And towards the end of the year last year, I was kind of just taking a look at his data in the office, and I noticed that when he went inside to lefties, he has probably like solid average, slightly above average vertical movement on his fastball, very spin efficient and very high spin. And he also has a little bit of horizontal movement too. And what I noticed is just when he tried to go inside, his fastball would leak over the middle. And honestly, that just required me to go and literally watch video of, all this little subset of pitches, 20 or 30 fastballs that I saw kind of, 4 or 5 inches over the plate, watch videos of where the target was. And so when he's trying to go inside the lefties, it was leaking over the middle. And his slider is very effective in this league. He has a 99th percentile slider velocity in this league. So it's a high spin, high velocity slider for the KBO. And it's been very effective for him. His swing and miss rate on it is huge. So is the CSW percentage. And so, we were talking at the end of last year, like right before the season ended. And I said, hey, your fastball kind of has this kind of movement to it. And sorry if it's confusing on the computer, but your fastball kind of has this kind of movement to it. And your slider kind of
put like a right-handed, left-handed hitter, show where they would be just so we can get that.
So a lefty would be, let me turn around.
Okay,
so
great.
a lefty would be here.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fastball kind of comes like this and a slider kind of comes like this. So he can back foot lefties with a slider, but then the fastball kind of rides back over the plate. And so the idea was just to kind of create something in the middle, where he could kind of not necessarily break barrels or anything like that, but just kind of keep something true in the on the inner half against lefties, to where, look, if he develops a Mariano Rivera cutter, by all means, let's do it. But the idea was just to not have something leak back over the plate. And so he's able to get under the hands of the lefties, which would then twofold. Number one, open up the breaking ball down and in, where he can back foot guys more effectively because it kind of comes off the same plane. And then also be able to get in with the fastball with a higher velocity up above the letters or up above the hands. And so it was a conversation we had last October, like right before he left to go back home. And I think it was up late one night, just like looking online at some things. And I forget which account tweeted, but there was an account that tweeted a video of a cutter at like 93 miles per hour, minor leaguer. And it was nasty. I was just like visually, it was really good. And it mentioned the minor leaguer's name. And I found the guy and I ended up sending him a DM on Twitter. There's like 2 a.m. And I said, hey, like, your cutter looks great. What is it? And credit to the guy, I'll send you his name if you wanted to share it. But he sent me all his data. He sent me a video explanation of how he grips it, what his mindset is when he throws it. I also texted a few people with the Dodgers, and obviously Kenley Jansen has a great cutter. Dustin, who we mentioned before, throws a pretty hard cutter. And so I was able to get some grip information from some of the guys in LA. And just kind of piece it all together and sent that video and the detailed information from that player and some of the stuff that I got from my friends over to Dan, and just said, hey, as you're throwing in the offseason, give this a shot. And Dan owns a Rapsodo unit. Also, his offseason throwing, the catcher he throws to is Kyle Higashioka from the Yankees. They live in the same town. So, he has a very good defensive catcher who has an understanding of what a good cutter is supposed to look like. And so he's getting real-time feedback from a big league catcher, and he has a Rapsodo unit. And so, yeah, I mean, so far it's been good. He threw a live BP yesterday, and the big thing we're just going to keep working on is just, maintaining the more cutterish movement with the higher spin efficiency than a slider, because his slider spin efficiency is in the teens. And, an okay cutter for him is going to be around 30% spin efficient. And a good one's going to be around 55 or 60. It's kind of what we determined. So it's just a matter of figuring out the best cue to keep the middle finger kind of pulling on the seam, and then the pointer finger kind of driving the trueness of the pitch. And we have some slow-mo video. We use the Edgertronic, and we're just working through some stuff. I mean, it's early, but he threw a few decent ones yesterday, to the point where, given that it's still February, it's pretty intriguing. And I think, over time, if he's able to consistently get that, it could be a really nice addition to his arsenal.
You, obviously, Dan, as we mentioned, is an incredibly kind dude, an incredibly knowledgeable dude, and also a dude who's willing, especially in the offseason, to experiment with particular things. Now, let's say, it doesn't even have to be with Dan, just with any pitcher in general. You have an opportunity, right? Say this pitcher develops a new pitch like a cutter. How involved are you in the process of actual in-game integration? You obviously can't say to a guy, hey, throw it more, or maybe you can later on in the season, but like, that's it feels like, from my relationship with pitchers, when they get a new pitch, it's like something that they really want to take it easy with, and it takes them a little while to get comfortable with it. So what is that relationship like?
It really depends on the pitcher. Dan and I in particular have a very good relationship, so I'm a little more hands-on with him, communication, than most of our guys. For the curveball for last year, for example, I was relatively hands-off with the actual pitch design, the development of the pitch. He learned the grip from a teammate. He worked on it in bullpens. So a lot of my job, we just talked about like designing a cutter. A lot of my job with the cutter, with the curveball, was just helping him stay confident in the pitch. If he threw a few bad ones, he would go back to leaning on the slider, which I understand because it was such an effective pitch. And so a lot of it was just reminding him, hey, this has the potential to be a good addition to your arsenal. I really didn't take any more responsibility than that with the curveball last year. Most of the communication, though, generally is there. We have quality control coaches, and so we basically split them departmentally. So we have a pitching quality control, and you can kind of think of it as like an assistant pitching coach and an assistant hitting coach. And so every series, before the series, myself and two of our data analysts sit down with both of our quality control coaches for a good hour, 45 minutes to an hour before every series. And we go over a pretty detailed analysis of our opponent. We also have an advanced scouting department that advances teams, and they have an extensive scouting report of all our opponents. So generally, we try to leave the communication to the coaches, in terms of game preparation, because again, we don't want to cloud the players with. I'm not a believer in thinking too much, but I am a believer in thinking about the right things. And so, if all of a sudden multiple people are giving different messages, and the guy's about to walk onto the mound, that's not a good thing. Like we want to have the messaging be pretty consistent. And so, I try my best to leave that communication process to the coaches, because again, they are the experts. And I think we've done a decent job on that. Obviously we can always improve things, but that's generally the process. Is pre-series, we do that. And then in our internal database, we do have a system where we can constantly provide updates, whether it's, statistical analysis, or even something such as like, this guy didn't sleep well tonight, or like this guy, we have, the Whoop band said he didn't get a great night's sleep, or his wife and him got in an argument, or his daughter has a cold, things like that matter. That people kind of take for granted. But, if they matter in the real world, if they matter in work, if you go to work and you're feeling sluggish, you're not going to be as productive. Same thing. We're all human beings. And those things matter. So I think a combination of the data analysis and that subjective, real-time information that we can kind of combine from our department in R&D and the coaching staff is really instrumental. And as it relates to the communication to the players for actual like game readiness, that's pretty much the coach's job.
You have a pretty, unique opportunity as someone who is both a diehard baseball fan and has worked with baseball and baseball for a long time, and also is very in tune to what media is saying about the game, what the fantasy community is saying about the game, what different sects of the baseball world are saying about the game. What is the most misconstrued metric out there currently?
Misconstrued metric. I don't think we value defense properly publicly. Okay. Yeah, I think defense it's tough to quantify. I think with StatCast, and I think now with the implementation of Hawkeye publicly, things are going to start to get better. But I think the process that goes into defense, and maybe that's hyper specific to my experience, because like I said, we are making a lot of changes to defensive shifting here. I think that the sort of, behind the curtain process to that is something that I think is a little bit just difficult to implement because there's so many variables involved. I remember with the Dodgers, I'm not going to name names, but there are a few like prominent pitchers in the major leagues that are very anti-shifts to this day. And so even something as simple as like balancing, do we piss the pitcher off or do we just say, screw it, we're going to put these guys in a position. We don't want the pitcher to change the way they pitch. At the same time, the hitter might change the way they hit. Or maybe they won't. They're going to try to. There's a lot of different variables involved, and I think it's a much more extensive process than people realize. And I don't quite think we've gotten to the point where it's there yet. I think also we discussed WOBA. We talk about WAR. WAR is like a really nice all-encompassing stat, but it's very results oriented. And so I think now that we have statistical backing, where we have data that tells you process-oriented things, where we have batted ball data, we have thrown ball data, where we have an understanding of expected results. Those calculations are going to change internally. So I would say most teams have like a WAR adjacent metric where it's similar. WAR is certainly a very good tool in the public to use just in terms of how to analyze what happened. But it's not necessarily the best picture of what's going to happen, simply because it's very results driven. If you hit a double, your WAR goes up. Even if you shouldn't have gotten credit for a double, you got a double. And so I think that's something that I would imagine is going to improve. I mean, knowing how smart the folks are at Fangraphs and BP and Pitcher List.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I do think that that's going to improve over time. And it's no fault of theirs. It's just as we continue to get access to more information in the public forum, I think people are going to start to implement those things. And they already have been. I mean, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of great discourse out there. I in my position where my entire job, my entire existence is keeping up with trends, it is still tough because there's so many smart people out there publishing so many good things.
So, I mean, you can't really thoroughly answer this next question, as you said, and you sort of answered it there. So I'll give you the opportunity to copt out with, it's just defense. But the question is, so what's on the horizon for R&D, for baseball R&D right now?
I mean, we still don't know how to prevent injuries. Like, I think, like with pitchers, like that's been something that's been discussed for decades. I won't cop out of this one. I mean, it's been something that's been discussed for decades. I talked to Tom House about this like not too long ago. I just think it's like, we don't really know, and we're doing all this biomechanical analysis. And, I have conversations regularly with like college professors in Australia that were working on cricket things. And I read articles about golfers using biomechanical analysis, but we don't really know what's the next thing in biomechanical analysis that relates to pitcher injury. So, workload management is obviously a crucial thing. We're working on that internally, just trying to refine our workload management metric. I can't go into details about what it says, but I can tell you we're working on refining it. Just like injury prevention, because at the end of the day, like if a guy can't be on the field, he can't perform, and then it's just a waste of a resource. And so like at the end, like we need you guys to be healthy. And as we continue throwing harder, and as the amateur baseball scene continues to evolve into really less practice and more games. I mean, even when I just turned 30, and even when I was coming up as a player, it's drastically different now as an amateur in the United States than it was when I was coming up. Guys are pitching a lot more games with a lot less time off as amateurs. And then in the pros, everybody's throwing harder and they're getting less days off and they're throwing less innings. And so there's going to be a higher risk of injury simply because you're putting more pressure on your arm over the course of a long period of time. And so we have to figure out how to prevent that. That's our responsibility. It's expensive, baseball players are expensive assets and they deserve to get paid what they deserve to get paid. But we need to keep them on the field. So that's the biggest thing. And how long is it going to take? I hope we figure it out today. But it's been a long time. This isn't a new thing. We just haven't made the strides to accomplish what we need to accomplish. I think training in terms of being able to get stronger and in terms of being able to figure out all these things. I mean, you look at Eric Cressy, what he's been able to do in the public space and drive line, what Kyle Bodie and everybody at the drive line and Tread Athletics and all these guys in the public space, even Alan Jaeger before that. I think training has advanced so much and we haven't really caught up in the injury prevention space yet. It's just tough. It's a tough thing and I don't know when it's going to happen. I hope it's going to happen soon, but I will see.
So you mentioned your 30, for anyone who isn't a dinosaur, what do you recommend for those interested in pursuing your path?
For those who aren't dinosaurs, or you could be a dinosaur.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
Obviously, they can
the
still have
cop out
success.
answer. Yeah, of course. The cop out answer is like learn how to code.
Mhm.
The major coding languages that we use are Python and R. We have a SQL database as well. So, a lot of data analysis. We have millions of points of data. I mean, if you ever, I'm sure a lot of people aren't familiar with what like a raw TrackMan data set looks like from a game, but it's just millions of points. You have every pitch. You have about 70 characteristics of every pitch on every single row, and it's just row after row after row after row. So when I open up, the 2020 TrackMan data for the KBO, or if I'm looking at, we're talking to Hawkeye a little bit, like it's extensive and it's overwhelming at times. So yeah, learning how to code. I know it's the cop out answer. I know it's the hot thing right now to be a computer scientist in terms of like advice to give, but that conduit role is just growing in importance as well. Like I said, we have so much information, every team, and I think at this point every team has the info, and so understanding how to just how to break down that information. A lot of what I do, if we're looking to hire somebody new, if we're looking to, a lot of my networking with younger people, if you will, is like just reading blogs. I mean, I've discovered a lot of people that just publish their writing, and I find that their breakdowns are interesting. And the one piece of advice that I will give, and it's something that I was unfamiliar with until I jumped into the game, is, and I don't mean this in any sort of like negative way or selfish or derogatory way, but in the public space, you're probably never going to know the amount of information that a team has. You're just never really going to be able to get to the point where you're going to be discovering something new. It's very rare, I should say, that we can discover something new that a team doesn't have. And so don't try to. That's not going to be the goal. If you're trying to get a job in the industry, the goal is not to discover something and teach a team new or something new. When I'm looking to hire somebody, the goal that I'm looking for, what I'm looking for is to find someone that I say, wow, their thought process is incredible and they're very curious, and they're going to be someone that we can hand this data to and they can build something really special. And so if you're able to show that ability as someone that's a job seeker, and you're able to say, hey, I can take this idea, like I said, change it from an idea to a structure, a process to a structure, or at least, give me a framework of what that structure would look like. Like that's, for me, that's I get really excited about seeing that. And whether you're 20 years old or 60 years old or whatever, I don't really care. I don't care what your background is. If you can show that process, that's the goal. So yeah, I mean, I know it's a little vague, but that's where we're at.
No, it was very inspiring. So much so that we just got a $400 contribution as a result of how inspiring it was. So I guess we have to cut you half of that.
We're hiring everybody. Contribute to Feeding America. We're actually not, but contribute to Feeding America anyway. It's a great cause.
So I
shouldn't say that. I'll get a ton of emails. I'm sorry.
I know, seriously.
We're not hiring at the moment. Yeah, but definitely contribute. It's a good
That's going to be the clip from this talk.
Please don't do that to me.
I want to open it up in the comments for questions. We already have one question that I wanted to be able to get to, as we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. We're going to throw it back to Nick. So this is coming from Mike Kurland. What major changes have you seen over the last few years in your field, and what positives or negatives, if any, have accompanied these changes?
I mean, the major changes. So my first year scouting was 2015, and that was the first year of StatCast. So like before then, we had no idea about any of this data. So like literally everything that you see online right now from like the StatCast era is brand new to me, and to all of my peers that started in that same time frame. And so just in the last 5 years, 5+ years now, it's been kind of like this overwhelming shift where we have all this access to all this new information. So everything's moved really quickly. And part of that conduit responsibility is trying to figure out exactly how to prioritize the information and how to figure out what's best to communicate and how to figure out all the things that we need to do in order to make that successful. So it's a challenge, and it's very exciting to be able to work with that kind of data. I would say the negative, and this is something that might cause a little stir, but I think people like me are getting hired a lot. And I think a shift in the demographics of thought, I think, are really important in baseball, because if you have people that kind of think the same way and come from a similar background, That's not a great thing for the game. So, I think we need to be conscious as an industry of who we're hiring and what kind of background they come from. And, just try to diversify the thought process that we have in terms of people that are surrounding us. Just to be able to try to get challenging opinions or opinions from people that might think a little bit differently than us. And I think that, as an industry, we might be swaying a little bit in kind of the realm of this sort of homogenous hiring process that probably is a negative thing. I think if we want to continue moving the game forward, we need to diversify that a little bit.
I often find that some of the best thinking about baseball can come from non-baseball texts. For example, one of the ones that I like to reference a lot is the Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, right? I think that has good implications both about fantasy baseball and about baseball in general. I know Kyle Bodie has, there's like a great poker book that he recommends to people about, analytics being not necessarily about what happened in the past, but what's going to happen in the future. What texts do you feel, if there are any, that you have come across that aren't necessarily baseball focused, but have taught you a lot about the sport?
The Principles were by Ray Dalio. Is a book that I really enjoyed. I actually read that back to back with Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a book more about like a drastic leadership style, about radical transparency. And I'm not sure, it'd be difficult to implement fully as Ray Dalio does with his company, but it's just an interesting dynamic of how to hold people accountable. And I think that over time, as you implement this philosophy, if you do it successfully, I do think that it's going to be a little bit more efficient long term, because radical transparency creates an accountability across the entire spectrum. And in the book, he highlights, he's the CEO of the company. He has interns that hold him accountable. And that sort of radical transparency is welcomed in his company. And so, just in terms of that communication, like we talked about, like the conduit style of communication and just being able to really figure out how to best communicate things. I think if you're able to hold each other accountable in a respectful way, and you're able to level the playing field of communication where everybody has a say in what their expertise is, I think that's great. So it's just an interesting book. I think it was just like, it kind of changed my perception of the best way to implement leadership philosophies, to the extent that sort of, like I said, flat hierarchy that I mentioned before works, I think, in that context, if you're able to implement it across the entire spectrum. So that's another one I think I would check out. But Thinking Fast and Slow is probably honestly my favorite book. So I'm happy you mentioned that one. It's just a great way to think about how to empathize with other people and how to try to understand. Again, it's a communication book, but how to try to empathize and understand with how other people's frames of mind work, and be able to work with people that you have a very, very keen awareness that are thinking differently than you. And I think that's a really, really positive thing.
That's funny that's your takeaway. My takeaway is, if you prime people, you can do whatever you want. If you prime people for an experience, you can get whatever you want.
That's why you and I are on such a time difference. And when I wake up to 104 texts and you force me to read them all,
that's
you're just trying to get me to think.
That's our other friend in that text chain, probably.
I just figured out your guys.
Okay, yeah, you figured out the secret. Obviously, the answer to this question is Dan Straley's Cutter. But what is something else that you would love to see implemented this year for the Lotte Giants?
Win more baseball games. No, I mean, look, personally, I'm really excited about Nerson Franco. We added a new foreign pitcher this year, and he's looked really good in spring preseason. I'm actually, in about an hour and 10 minutes, he has a live BP. So when we hang up, I'm going to go to the ballpark. Just overall, just like continuing to improve our processes. I think the more we build self-sufficient, I said this last year, I think it was to Eno Saris, but if I have to redefine my own job every year, we're doing this right. Where if my responsibilities constantly evolve, or I have to figure out a way, I have to challenge myself to be a good contributor and to provide value to the organization, then we're doing everything right. Because if my responsibilities from last year were implemented successfully, they're going to be self-sustainable, and I don't have to do that anymore. And so that's the goal. I mean, just continue to move everything forward, continue to be efficient with our processes, whether it's like advanced scouting reports or biomechanical analysis or player evaluation or, trades, all the conversations that I said, I had with the executives earlier. As long as we are moving forward and continuing to improve on those and continuing to challenge ourselves to be better, I'm happy. And that's vague, but at the same time, it's really important. And I do think that all those things, result in winning more baseball games, which is the ultimate goal.
Two final questions. One from Justin Paradis over in the comments. Outside of the language, were there any other cultural differences that were challenging for you last season?
Spicy food, which I'm better with now. No, the workplace culture is the most different here. There's the hierarchy. So you have to, there's like a strict hierarchy of respecting your elders and respecting people of authority. And so at times that turns, and this is a negative thing, but at times that turns into sort of those authority figures treating people below them a little bit disrespectfully. And so it's been a challenge trying to navigate, how exactly to do that, where I am now, this authority figure, if you will. I kind of uncomfortable saying that, but like trying to figure out how to navigate the pattern of communication where I am trying to encourage people to be empowered and to try to do their jobs to the best of their abilities their own way. And that's just not something they're used to because the workplace culture here is so different. So that's been the biggest difference for me. And that's probably of everything. I love Korea. I love living here. The people are amazing. It's a beautiful country. That's probably the biggest negative for me, just to be very, very honest. The spicy foods I'm better with, but that was definitely a challenge at first. Everything else. Everything else has been positive. Honestly, I think the biggest thing for me positive is just people in public are really patient and they understand that like I'm from a different place and I don't speak the language and I'm not familiar with the culture, and they're really willing to work with you on learning that stuff, and they really appreciate when you try. I think that's another thing. Like if I try to speak Korean, which is terrible, but I just try, I try to learn the proper way to introduce myself or the proper way to ask for something when I'm at a store or a restaurant or something like that. There's a genuine appreciation from the Korean people where they understand that I'm trying my best to learn their culture. And I think that's been a really cool experience because it's exciting. I like learning new things. And I think that, people showing a genuine appreciation for something like that is a little wholesome, and it makes me feel good. So that's been really cool, like genuinely awesome. I really, really enjoy that.
And then the final question, I want to wrap up with something very KBO because, you work for a KBO team and people should be watching the KBO. There's a great term that the KBO subreddit seems to have coined, which is KBO-ness, which is like, it's 12-1 in the bottom of the ninth inning and the team comes back and wins the game. Is there what is a KBO-ness experience that you had in the past year that you were like, man, this is a fun brand of baseball?
Something like that, probably. There's fun. It's not fun when you lose. We lost some games on walk-offs last year that weren't very fun, that were a little KBO-ness-ish. It's not exciting when that happens. Yeah, I would say, there's just a lot of weird stuff. It's hard to pinpoint, like, just random things that happen. I think you'll have like a little bit of a merry-go-round on the bases sometimes, or the one thing I enjoy, and this because I come from a pitching background and because Dan struck out so many guys last year, I like when guys like get fooled at the plate and they do like this spin.
Yes.
I just think it looks really funny.
Yeah.
And it's just like kind of outrageous. So our guys do it too. I shouldn't be like laughing about it, but that's just something weird that like you wouldn't know about unless you watch a game. But yeah, I don't know. Like we try to avoid that because the KBO-ness stuff, I saw that. Like the KBO-ness stuff usually happens later in the games because like the quality of pitching might go down a little bit and the bats start to improve. We actually have a pretty good bullpen. Our guys throw pretty hard. We have the hardest throwing pitching staff in the KBO, and we throw the least amount of fastballs in the KBO.
Oh, wow.
The second part is something I'm proud of. Yeah. But our bullpen's pretty good. Our eighth inning, ninth inning guys throw pretty hard. So we generally are able to avoid a little less of the craziness at the end of the game just because we do have a pretty good back end of the bullpen. But it is pretty weird. It's just very different. It's fun when we win because of it, and it's not so fun when we lose because of it.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's an entertaining time.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking this hour out of your day. I know you got a busy day. It's awesome. You're going to go actually watch some human being throw a baseball in about an hour. A lot of us are definitely very envious of that. But yeah, Josh Herzenberg, Director of Research and Development for the Lotte Giants. Thanks so much for taking the time joining us today, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for being here, Josh.
This is a great thing.
Yeah.
And really quick question I have is, where did you play ball in New York?
So I grew up in White Plains, just outside of the city. I was born in the city,
Sure.
grew up in Westchester, and then I played at Division III, Oneonta State, upstate. Blew up my arm, ended up getting so it was cold. And I'm trying to avoid that cold from now on. It's warm here in Tucson. It's 65 degrees today, so I'll be in a hoodie. But yeah, I played there, and then I got a master's from Georgetown, and then scooted down south to scout for the next few years.
Sure. I mean, have you ever tried to like go to Australia? Like, Australia, look, you're throwing this wrong. Let me give me the ball. Let me show you how to do this. Right?
No. He's I don't know if that would go pretty well. I can throw strike. That's about it. No, I mean, look, it's tough to, like, you're in the bullpen and it's like he's throwing a slider at 3,000 RPMs at 87 miles per hour, like on the black. I'm like, that was good. Just like do that again. Like, I don't really have anything to say. So it's like a lot of coaching when a guy is like that, it's just kind of just shut up and let him do his thing. Yeah, it's like, that was a good pitch. Like, just do that one again. So I mean, the guy led the world in strikeouts last year. You kind of just like, sometimes you just sit back and enjoy the show.
No, yeah, absolutely. I love that. But really, thank you so much for taking the time. We really do appreciate it. It's enlightening to see this stuff and to hear about it. And we wonder what it's like and to actually understand, like, okay, cool, yeah, front office is doing these things, doing the passing on this information, and that's what we want to hear. It's great having you here. We can't appreciate it enough. So thanks for being here, Josh.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great thing, and happy to help out, and happy to see the success you guys are having. So I appreciate the invite.
Thanks, Josh.
And of course, Fast.
Absolutely.
Thanks for popping back in.
Yeah, I'll go thank Kristen. That's who you really want to thank.
Thanks, Kristen.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye.